The brown envelope remained untouched on the Stevensons' dining table for 3 hours before Martha finally found the courage to open it. Her hands trembled as she held the results of the DNA test, a test she never imagined she would have to take at the age of 65. The lab's letterhead seemed to weigh a ton. "George, can you come here for a moment?" Her voice wavered as she called out to her husband in the next office. The Stevensons had built a respectable life in Louisville. George was a renowned retired heart surgeon, and Martha chaired the local church's events committee. Their Victorian house in the most traditional area of the city was a status symbol, as were their surnames and their supposedly impeccable lineage until that moment. "What does it say?" George asked, adjusting his reading glasses as he sat down next to his wife. Martha couldn't speak. She just slid the paper towards him, tears starting to form in her eyes. The words on the document were clear. She shared no DNA with any of the relatives she believed to be her biological parents. "This must be wrong," George muttered, but his voice betrayed the certainty he was trying to convey. The discovery couldn't have come at a more ironic time. Just 2 weeks earlier, his only son Robert had announced that he and his wife Claire intended to adopt a 3-year-old Korean girl. The news had caused a storm in the Stevenson family, with Martha leading the opposition to the idea. "How can you even consider bringing a stranger into our family?" Martha had declared over Sunday dinner, her words sharp as razors. "The Stevensons have a lineage that goes back generations. We can't just ignore that." Robert had stormed out of his parents' house that night, Claire in tears by his side. Since then, the silence between them had been deafening, broken only by occasional messages from Claire trying to build bridges. Now, sitting in front of that envelope that would change everything, Martha felt the weight of every word she had spoken. The DNA test had been carried out at her doctor's insistence after they discovered a genetic condition that didn't make sense with the family history she knew. "I need to call Agnes," Martha said, referring to her older cousin, the only person alive who might have some answers. Agnes was 75 and had a razor-sharp memory, especially for family secrets that no one else dared mention. The conversation with Agnes revealed an even more disturbing truth. Martha had been adopted in 1957, part of an irregular adoption scheme that affected hundreds of families in the post-war period. Her parents, desperate for a child and unable to have one biologically, had paid a considerable sum to a local doctor who provided babies for upper-class families. "Your parents loved you more than anything, Martha," Agnes explained over the phone, her voice heavy with emotion. "They planned to tell you when you were older, but after the accident," her voice faltered, remembering the tragic car accident that had taken the lives of Martha's parents when she was just 16. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha looked at George, who was holding her hand tightly, and then at the picture of Robert on the wall, next to which should have been a picture of her future granddaughter Lily. "What have I done?" Martha whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Tears now ran freely down her face, decades of certainties crumbling like a house of cards. The next morning, Martha found herself sitting at her computer researching international adoptions and Korean culture. Her hands trembled on the keyboard as she typed an email to Robert. "Dear son, there's so much I need to tell you, so much I need to fix. Please give me a chance to explain. I want to meet my granddaughter. Love, Mother." Robert's reply came hours later, cautious but open to dialogue. Martha knew that the road to reconciliation would be long and difficult, but she was determined to transform her own story of rejection into one of acceptance and love. In the weeks that followed, Martha immersed herself in an investigation into her own past, discovering that her story was connected to dozens of other families in a similar situation. With George's help, she began to document every case she came across, every story of babies provided for families in the post-war period. "Maybe it's time to turn our pain into something bigger," George suggested one evening as they organized the documents they had collected. "Other families need to know the truth. Other people deserve to know their origins." Martha nodded, thinking about how her own journey of discovery had only just begun. In her mind, the idea was already forming for what would become the Lost Roots Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping adoptive families trace their origins and promote awareness about adoption. Meanwhile, in an orphanage in Seoul, a little girl called Lily was playing with a doll, unaware that her story was about to become intertwined with a much larger plot of redemption and discovery. Martha didn't know it yet, But her granddaughter would one day become the bridge between two worlds, uniting not only two cultures, but also generations of lost and found stories. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Claire with news about the adoption process. Martha took a deep breath, preparing herself to be the grandmother her future granddaughter deserved, not because of the blood in her veins, but because of the love she would choose to give. Agnes Harrison closed the door to her Lexington apartment with a heavy sigh after the revealing phone call with Martha. For 50 years, she had kept the secret of her cousin's adoption, and now that the truth had come out, other ghosts from the past were beginning to emerge from their carefully constructed shadows. With slow steps, she made her way to the closet in her bedroom, where a worn shoebox occupied the topmost corner of a shelf. Inside, dozens of yellowed newspaper clippings and old photographs told a dark story that went far beyond Martha's adoption. Dr. Richard Montgomery. Agnes murmured, her fingers tracing the black and white photo of a middle-aged man with a stern expression. The doctor had been the architect of an elaborate illegal adoption scheme that stretched across the state of Kentucky in the 1950s and 60s. While organizing the documents on her dining room table, Agnes received an unexpected message from Robert Stevenson. Her nephew, still processing the news about his mother, asked for more information about the family's past. "Aunt Agnes, I need to understand. How did this happen? Why didn't anyone ever say anything?" The answer would be complex. Agnes started to type a long message, but stopped. Some truths needed to be told in person. "Can we meet at the Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 10 a.m.?" she replied instead. The next morning, the cafe on the banks of the Ohio River served as the setting for a conversation that would change Robert's understanding of his own family. Agnes arrived first, choosing a discreet table at the back of the establishment. Dr. Montgomery wasn't just a doctor. Agnes began as soon as Robert sat down. He ran a network that connected hospitals, social workers, and wealthy families willing to pay for babies. "Your grandmother Elizabeth, my aunt, couldn't have children and was desperate for a baby." Robert listened intently as he stirred his untouched coffee. "And my mother, where did she come from?" Agnes removed a yellowed envelope from her bag. Her mother was born in a clandestine clinic in Cincinnati. Her biological mother was a 16-year-old girl from a traditional Catholic family. The scandal would have destroyed their reputation at the time. The revelations continued to flow. Agnes explained how Dr. Montgomery had facilitated hundreds of similar adoptions, always manipulating documents and creating fake birth certificates. Money bought silence, and babies were transferred like commodities. "But why did my mother react so badly to the idea of adopting Lily?" Robert asked, his voice betraying the hurt still present. "Your mother built her entire identity on a lie that she didn't even know existed," Agnes replied softly. "When you mentioned adoption, it must have touched something deep inside her, an unconscious fear she never knew she had." While they were talking, Claire, Robert's wife, sent a photo of Lily at the orphanage. The little girl was smiling shyly at the camera, hugging a teddy bear. Robert showed the photo to Agnes, who felt tears forming in her eyes. "She reminds me of your mother as a child," Agnes commented. "Same curious eyes." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly woman whom Agnes recognized immediately. Nancy Peterson, a former nurse at Dr. Montgomery's clinic, had heard about the investigations that were beginning to emerge. "Sorry to intrude," Nancy said, sitting down with them. "But when I heard that you were investigating the Montgomery case, I had to come. There's so much that needs to be revealed." Nancy revealed that she kept a detailed diary of all the adoptions she had witnessed during her years at the clinic. The records included real names, dates, and in some cases, even information about the biological families. "Your mother wasn't the only one, Robert," Nancy explained. "There are hundreds of people in Kentucky who don't know their true origins. Some families have paid fortunes to keep these secrets buried." Robert picked up his phone and began making frantic notes. As a criminal lawyer, he recognized the potential legal impact of these revelations. "This goes beyond a family story," he muttered. "It's a case of systematic fraud that has affected generations." Agnes watched as Robert processed each new piece of information. She could see the cogs turning in his mind, connecting the dots between his mother's past and his own future as a foster parent. "You know what's ironic?" Robert finally said. "All this time, Mom was worried about preserving the Stevenson lineage when in fact the family has always been built on choices and love, not blood," Agnes added. Nancy promised to share her records with the family, but warned of the possible consequences. Many powerful people were involved. Some are still alive and won't want this story to come out. Before they parted, Robert hugged Agnes at length. "Thank you for keeping these memories alive, Annie. Now I understand why Mom always said you were the keeper of the family stories." On the way home, Robert stopped at a red light and looked again at Lily's photo. The little girl who would be his daughter wouldn't share his blood, just as her mother didn't share the Stevenson blood. But now he understood that family was something much deeper than genetic markers. He picked up the phone and typed a message to Martha. "Mom, when you're ready, there's a lot more to our story that we need to discover together. Lily will love having a grandmother who understands so well what it means to find your true place in the world." Dr. James Henderson's office in Louisville was silent when Martha, George, and Robert arrived for the meeting. As one of the few historians specializing in post-war medical records, Henderson had spent years investigating cases similar to Martha's. Dr. Montgomery's scheme was more extensive than we imagined, Henderson explained, spreading out documents on his mahogany desk. "We found connections to clinics in 5 different states. Kentucky was just the center of the operation." Martha held Robert's hand as she looked through old photographs of the clinic where she was supposedly born. The red brick building, now abandoned in nearby Cincinnati, held the secrets of hundreds of stories like hers. "I gained access to the clinic's financial records," Henderson continued, adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses. "The amounts paid were astronomical for the time. Some families sold entire estates to get a baby." Robert, now fully involved in the investigation, flipped through a notebook with detailed notes. "Dr. Henderson, is there any possibility of tracing the biological families?" "It's complicated," the historian replied, "but not impossible." Nancy Peterson, the former nurse, kept parallel records. "The problem is that many of these people may not want this truth to come out." While they were discussing the next steps, Robert's cell phone vibrated with a message from Claire. The date for picking Lily up from the orphanage had been confirmed. 3 weeks. In just 3 weeks, little Lily would officially become part of the Stevenson family. Martha watched the expression of happiness on her son's face and felt a mixture of joy and regret. "We need to create something permanent," she said suddenly. "A place where people like me can find answers." The idea of the Lost Roots Foundation began to take shape in that room. George, who had remained silent until then, picked up his notepad and began to sketch out a plan of action. "We could use the old Wilson Clinic building," he suggested. "It's been vacant for years, and I have contacts on the board of trustees who can help with the acquisition." Dr. Henderson nodded enthusiastically. "That space would be perfect. We could create a research center, an archive dedicated to documenting these cases and helping families in their search." While they were discussing the details, Nancy Peterson arrived, carrying an old cardboard box. "I found something else," she announced, placing the box on the table. Correspondence between Dr. Montgomery and several important Kentucky families. The letters revealed a disturbing pattern of manipulation and blackmail. Montgomery not only facilitated the illegal adoptions, but also kept detailed records that he used to extort money from the families years later. "That explains why so many people still want to keep everything secret," Robert muttered, examining one of the letters. "Some of these families are still very influential in the region." Martha picked up one of the photographs showing a group of nurses in front of the clinic. Among them was a young woman who looked remarkably like herself in her youth. "That could be your biological mother," Nancy added softly. "Catherine Mills. She worked at the clinic for a short time in 1957. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Martha traced the outline of the young woman's face on the photograph with trembling fingers. Catherine Mills. Finally, a real name, a tangible connection to her origins. "She's still alive," Nancy added. "She lives in Asheville, North Carolina. Never married, dedicated her life to pediatric nursing." Robert watched his mother absorb the information, remembering his own journey towards parenthood through adoption. "Mom, when we get back from Korea with Lily, maybe we can—" "Yes," Martha replied before he had even finished his sentence. "I think it's time for some answers." The group spent the next few hours planning their next steps. The Lost Roots Foundation was beginning to take shape, a research and support center, a place where lost stories could be recovered and families reconnected. "We need to do this right," George emphasized. "Not just for Martha or the other families affected, but for Lily and all the adopted children who deserve to know their full stories. As they left Henderson's office, the sun was beginning to set over Louisville. Martha paused for a moment, watching the skyline of the city she had always considered home, now seen through a new perspective. "You know," she said to Robert, "when you told us about Lily, I was so caught up in the fear of losing something I never really had. Now I understand that family is something we build, not just something we inherit." Robert hugged his mother, feeling the weight of generations past and future on his shoulders. In 3 weeks' time, they would leave for Seoul to pick up Lily, and a new page of this story would begin to be written. On the way home, Martha stopped at the local stationery store and bought a diary. On the first page, she wrote, "For Lily, so that you will always know that your roots, though spread across continents, are deep and true. Love, Grandma Martha." The arrival at Seoul International Airport was a whirlwind of emotions for the Stevenson family. Martha nervously tightened the strap of her handbag as she watched Robert and Claire fill in the last immigration forms. In a few hours, they would meet Lily in person for the first time. "The papers are all in order," announced Mrs. Kim, the Korean social worker, who was waiting for them in the airport lobby. Her English was impeccable, the result of years of facilitating international adoptions. "The orphanage is expecting you tomorrow at 9 a.m. During the drive to the hotel, Martha couldn't stop thinking about Catherine Mills, her birth mother, and the trip they would make to North Carolina after returning with Lily. 2 meetings that would forever change the meaning of family in her life. "You're very quiet, Mom," Robert commented, touching her shoulder gently from the front seat of the van. "Just thinking about how life twists and turns," she replied, watching the illuminated city pass by the window. "A few months ago, I was so determined to keep what I thought was our family heritage intact. Now here we are on the other side of the world, expanding our family in ways I never imagined." At the hotel, while they were unpacking, George received an important call from Dr. Henderson in Louisville. "We found more documents in the basement of the old clinic." The historian's voice sounded agitated over the phone. "Martha needs to know about this immediately." George activated the speakerphone, gathering everyone in the room. Henderson explained that among the documents discovered were letters exchanged between Catherine Mills and Elizabeth Stevenson, Martha's adoptive mother. They knew each other, Henderson revealed. Catherine wasn't just a nurse who worked briefly at the clinic. She was Elizabeth's best friend at nursing school. It was Elizabeth who helped her hide her pregnancy from her family. Martha sat down heavily on the hotel bed, Henderson's words echoing in her ears. Claire immediately sat down beside her, holding her hand in silent support. "There's more," Henderson continued. "Elizabeth promised Catherine that she would take care of the baby of you, Martha, but Dr. Montgomery interfered. He threatened to expose the scheme if Elizabeth didn't pay an exorbitant sum. That's why her adoptive parents sold the family farm." Robert began making frantic notes on his cell phone. As a lawyer, he could see the legal implications unfolding before his eyes. "This changes everything we know about the case. It wasn't just an illegal adoption scheme, it was systematic extortion." Ms. Kim, who had stayed to help with some final guidance on the meeting with Lily, watched the scene with professional interest. In her 20 years of working with international adoption, she had witnessed countless stories of family secrets coming to light. "You know," she said softly, "in working with adoptions, we learned that each story has many layers. Like a traditional Korean bojagi, a fabric made up of different patches that together form something new and beautiful." Martha wiped away the tears that were beginning to form. "How could Elizabeth keep this secret for so long? How could she not tell me about Catherine?" "Out of love," George replied, taking a seat next to his wife. "The same love that brought us here today to meet our granddaughter." That night, no one got much sleep. Martha spent hours on the hotel balcony, watching the lights of Seoul and writing in her diary to Lily. She described how fear can make us make wrong decisions, but how love has the power to heal old wounds. The next morning, as they were preparing to go to the orphanage, Martha received a message from Nancy Peterson. "Catherine always asked about you on birthdays. I've kept all the letters she's written over the years. When you get back, we'll have lots to talk about." The drive to the orphanage was silent, each family member lost in their own thoughts. Mrs. Kim occasionally pointed out interesting places from the window, trying to ease the growing tension. "Over there," she finally said, pointing out a modest but well-kept building with a small playground in the front garden. This is where Lily has been living for the last few months, getting ready to meet her American family. Before they got out of the van, Martha grabbed Robert's arm. "Son, I want you to know. I understand now. I understand how love can transcend blood and borders. Elizabeth taught me that even if I've only just realized it." Robert hugged his mother, feeling the weight of generations of secrets and love dissolving in that moment. "We're going to meet your granddaughter, Mom. And when we get back home, we'll unravel the rest of this story together." Claire took out of her handbag a small teddy bear they had brought for Lily. Tied around her neck was a silk scarf with patterns mixing American and Korean motifs, a gift specially commissioned by Martha. As they walked towards the entrance of the orphanage, Martha thought of Elizabeth, of Catherine, of all the women who had woven the complex threads of her story. Now it was her turn to add new threads to that fabric, starting with unconditional love for a little girl she was about to meet. Mrs. Kim opened the door, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. Somewhere inside the building, Lily was waiting to meet her new family, a family built not by blood or tradition, but by choices, truths, and above all, love. The first meeting between Martha and Lily took place in a cozy room in the orphanage decorated with colorful drawings on the walls and carefully organized toys. The little Korean girl, wearing a light blue dress, and Mary Jane's timidly walked through the door, holding the hand of Mrs. Park, her main caregiver. "Annyeonghaseyo," Martha pronounced carefully, using one of the few Korean words she had learned in recent weeks. Lily's face lit up with a hesitant smile. Robert and Claire watched the scene with tears in their eyes, while George documented the moment with his camera. Mrs. Kim softly translated the words exchanged between Lily and her caregiver. "She wants to know if you're the Halmini who made the special bear for her," translated Mrs. Kim, referring to the Korean word for grandmother. Martha nodded, picking up the teddy bear with the silk scarf. Lily approached cautiously, her small fingers gently touching the fabric. Within seconds, the little girl was on Martha's lap, examining the patterns on the scarf while babbling a mixture of Korean and a few English words she knew. "Beautiful," Lily said clearly, surprising everyone. It was one of the words she had learned during her preparation to meet the American family. Over the next 2 hours, the Stevenson family took part in a series of activities planned with Lily. They played with building blocks, drew together, and shared a traditional Korean snack prepared by the orphanage. "She's extraordinary," Martha whispered to George, observing how Lily was already interacting naturally with Robert and Claire, her future parents. While the final adoption formalities were being processed in the adjoining office, Martha received a text message from Nancy Peterson. "Catherine has agreed to meet us when you get back. She's looking forward to meeting your daughter and great-granddaughter." The news made Martha hold her breath for a moment. Amidst the joy of meeting Lily, the reality of her own past continued to unfold. George noticed her agitation and took her hand. "One thing at a time," he murmured gently. "Today is about Lily." Mrs. Park approached with a photo album documenting Lily's early years at the orphanage. "We want you to have this," explained Mrs. Kim, translating, "so that Lily never loses her connection to her origins." Leafing through the album, Martha found not only photos, but also small artifacts, a stamp with Lily's name in Korean characters, a baby bracelet, even a lock of her first haircut. "The mothers at the orphanage," began Mrs. Kim, choosing her words carefully. "They keep these records because they understand the importance of roots. Even when a child finds a new home, their story begins here." Robert, who was sitting on the floor, playing with Lily, looked at his mother with understanding. "Just like Grandma's story began with Catherine and Elizabeth," he said softly. The afternoon passed quickly, and soon it was time to say goodbye. Lily, who had become especially attached to the silk scarf, didn't want to let go of Martha's hand. "Tomorrow," Mrs. Kim translated Mrs. Park's words for Lily. "Your new family will return tomorrow, and then you will go to your new home." As they prepared to leave, Martha noticed a small group of women watching discreetly through the office window, the other orphanage caretakers who had taken part in Lily's life over the last few months. They're like Catherine, Martha thought, women who love and care even though they know they'll have to let go. At the hotel that evening, the family gathered for dinner in the panoramic restaurant. The city of Seoul shone beyond the windows, an ocean of light that seemed to reflect the turbulent emotions of the day. "We need to plan the trip to Asheville as soon as we get back," Robert commented as he consulted his calendar. Maybe we can go the weekend after Lily arrives, give her time to adjust a bit. Martha agreed, her heart divided between the anxiety of meeting Catherine and the worry about Lily's adjustment. I wonder how she reacted when she heard I was looking for her. Claire, who had remained pensive for most of dinner, finally spoke up. You know what I realized today? Lily will have something you've never had, Martha, the chance to know your full story from the beginning. No secrets, no lies. And that's a greater gift than any blood inheritance could ever be, George added, raising his glass in a silent toast. Later, alone on the balcony of her bedroom, Martha wrote another diary entry for Lily. Today I met you, my little one, and I understood that family isn't something we find or inherit, it's something we build day by day with love and truth. Your roots now stretch across continents and generations, each thread of this story weaving a richer and more beautiful tapestry than I could ever have imagined. The sound of distant sirens echoed through the city at night, reminding Martha how different Seoul was from Louisville. Tomorrow they would return to the orphanage to pick Lily up for good. In a week they would be home, preparing to meet Catherine. So many ends of the same story, finally connecting. Martha touched the cord around her neck, where she now kept two photos, an old one of Elizabeth, her adoptive mother, and a new one taken today of Lily smiling on her lap. 2 generations of chosen love, of family built beyond blood. Night was advancing over Seoul, and with it the promise of a new chapter was about to begin. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows of the Stevensons' living room in Louisville, where Martha was carefully organizing photographs in a special album. 3 months had passed since Lily's arrival from Korea, and now she was preparing for another significant meeting. Catherine Mills would be arriving in a few hours. Halmini, Lily's cheerful voice echoed through the house as she ran towards her grandmother, her small, determined steps already familiar with her surroundings. The girl's English was improving every day, although she still retained certain Korean words, especially Halmini, to refer to Martha. Come and see, darling, Martha called, tapping lightly on the space next to her on the sofa. These are very special pictures. Lily snuggled up next to her grandmother, still wearing the silk scarf she had received at the orphanage, now transformed into a headband. Her curious eyes scanned the black and white images. Who's that? She asked, pointing to a young nurse smiling at the camera. This is Catherine, Martha replied softly. My birth mother. She's coming to visit us today. Robert entered the room, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. Claire's just finishing tidying up the guest room. Nancy Peterson called. She and Dr. Henderson are on their way with the latest documents from the foundation. The Lost Roots Foundation had become a reality more quickly than they had expected. The old Wilson Clinic building was already under renovation, and dozens of families had sought help after the first reports about the case came to light. Daddy said you were adopted too, just like me, Lily commented innocently, surprising Martha with her insight. Yes, dear. And you know what, that makes me understand even better how special you are to our family. The doorbell rang, and George went to answer it. Nancy Peterson and Dr. Henderson entered, carrying folders in an old box. We've found more letters, Nancy announced, taking a seat in an armchair. Catherine wrote to Elizabeth every year on her birthday, Martha. Elizabeth kept every one of them. Martha picked up the letters with trembling hands. Each envelope contained pieces of a story of love and sacrifice that spanned decades. In one of them, dated 1975, Elizabeth explained why she had never delivered the letters. Dear Catherine, fear has kept me from sharing these letters with Martha. Fear of losing her, fear that she wouldn't understand. But I treasure every word of yours, every bit of love you've sent over the years. Maybe one day when I'm gone, she'll find her way back to you. Love, Elizabeth. She never had the chance to tell me. Martha murmured, remembering the accident that had taken Elizabeth and her father away so prematurely. The sound of a car parking interrupted their thoughts. Through the window, they saw a cab pull up in front of the house. An elderly but elegant woman got out of the vehicle. That's her, Nancy confirmed softly. Martha stood up, Lily still holding her hand. Robert and Claire stood nearby, offering silent support. George opened the door before Catherine had even rung the bell. The moment when mother and daughter met for the first time in 65 years was marked by an emotionally charged silence. Catherine, with her perfectly groomed white hair and eyes identical to Martha's, took a hesitant step forward. Martha, she whispered, her voice breaking. You have your grandmother's eyes. The two women embraced decades of separation, dissolving into tears. Lily watched the scene curiously, still holding the silk scarf that symbolized her own adoption journey. "And who is this little lady?" Catherine asked, noticing Lily. "This is your great-granddaughter," Martha replied, a new wave of emotion in her voice. "Lily, Annyeonghaseyo." Catherine surprised everyone by pronouncing the greeting in Korean perfectly. "I learned a few words when I found out I had a Korean great-granddaughter." The next few hours were filled with stories, revelations, and connections being made. Catherine shared how she had followed Martha's life from a distance through the updates Elizabeth secretly sent. "When I found out that you were looking for me," Catherine explained, "I realized that the circle could finally close. And then I found out about Lily, and I understood that some stories need generations to find their resolution." Nancy and Dr. Henderson presented the Foundation's progress, showing how the work was already helping other families reconnect their lost ties. "We're going to need your help, Catherine," Dr. Henderson explained. "Your perspective as a birth mother who has been separated from her daughter will be invaluable to other families in a similar situation." "I'd be honored," Catherine replied, watching as Lily played with the teddy bear she had received in Seoul. "Maybe this way, we can turn our pain into something positive." In the evening, while Claire prepared dinner, Martha found Catherine alone in the garden, gazing at the roses Elizabeth had planted decades ago. "She took good care of you," Catherine said softly. "Elizabeth was my best friend, and even when Dr. Montgomery separated us, she never failed to keep me part of her life, even from a distance." "Now I understand why she always said that family is more than blood," Martha replied. "She knew better than anyone that love is a choice we make every day." Lily appeared at the back door, calling everyone in for dinner. The table was set for a meal that mixed traditional American dishes with some Korean specialties that Claire had learned to prepare. Sitting together, three generations of a family built through love, choices, and redemption shared not only a meal, but also the deep understanding that sometimes the most difficult paths lead us exactly where we need to be. Martha watched her biological mother help Lily use the hashies while Robert documented the moment with his camera. George held her hand under the table, a silent gesture of support that spanned decades of partnership. To new beginnings, Catherine proposed raising her glass. "And for circles that finally close." "For family," Lily added in her still hesitant English, making everyone smile. The sun was setting over Louisville, casting a golden light through the windows of the Stevensons' dining room, illuminating a family that had learned that true love transcends blood borders and time.